Hello everyone, hello viewers, welcome to our channel, our Team Casa channel. So guys, in continuation of our India's webinar, we have kept a webinar with the topic of India's. We will be covering two topics today: India's 16 and India's 40. That is related to property, plant, and equipment, and another India's 40 that is related to investment property. And today, Ms. Chandni Gupta is with us. She is associated with KPMG, and she will be heading this webinar today. And she will share her knowledge with us and with our viewers. And I believe that our viewers will learn a lot from this today's webinar. First of all, I would request I welcome Sumit sir as well in this webinar, and I would request to please give some welcome remark to the audience.
Thank you, Prinka, for welcoming. And today's speaker, CA Chandni Gupta, rank holder in CA final. So once again, welcome to you. Chandni ji has already delivered webinar on this Teamcasa platform. And today, as Prinka said, we are going to cover two important Indias. One is property, plant, and equipment, and another one is investment property. So these are very important as far as the IGAP concern or India is concerned. So we will learn a lot in this financial reporting. What are the compliances to be checked while drafting the financial statement, and various other aspect with regard to IGAP. So once again, welcome to all viewers. And Chandni ji, uh, as a, as her profile, she is rank holder last year and actively involved in the field of Indias. And recently, uh, efforts made she has made efforts in the book of C. Alok Garg, renowned author of Indias. So congratulations to Chandni for
Thank
part
you so
of
much.
this venture of Alok Garg. Now I request to take further. Over to you, Chandni ji.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. And so, guys, today we are going to discuss Index 16 and Index 40. So, let me just share my screen first. So, screen दिख रहा है?
जी.
Okay.
हाँ जी, screen is visible.
Okay. So, friends, today we are going to discuss Index 16, which talks about property, plant, and equipment, and Index 40, which talks about investment property. So, first of all, let's understand what these standards are based out of. Like, these are asset based standards. There are two types of assets, tangible and intangible. So, I understand that yesterday, CA Rishabh Nagrani took a session on India's 38, which is on intangible assets. So, you have covered intangible assets already. Today, we will discuss about tangible assets. Tangible assets are the assets which we can see, feel, and touch. Right. So there are two types of tangible assets. It could be PPE, that is property, plant, and equipment, and it could be investment property. So, first of all, let's understand the guidance that has been provided with respect to these two types of assets. For PPE, we have AS 10, which is also property, plant, and equipment. So, let me tell you that in 2015, MCA notified Indian accounting standards, which are in alignment with international financial reporting standards. In 2015, when Indies were notified, there was a standard Indies 16 on property, plant, and equipment. And in IGAP, there was a standard AS 10, which was for accounting for fixed assets. Then later on, after the introduction of Ind AS in 2016, MCA notified a revised AS 10, which was on the same lines as Ind AS 16. So as we speak, there are no major differences between AS 10 and Ind AS 16. Schedule 2 of the Companies Act 2013 has been provided to guide the useful life of assets. With respect to investment property, in IGAP, there is a standard called AS13, accounting for investments. There is a section for investment property separately in this accounting standard, which provides guidance for recognition measurement of investment properties. And in Ind AS 40, a specific standard has been given for investment properties. So this is the applicable guidance. First of all, let's understand what is a PPE. PPE is nothing but a tangible item. Tangible is which you can see, touch, and feel. This item, which the company holds for use in production or supply of goods or services, or for the purpose of rental or administrative purposes. So, for example, the company has plant and machinery for manufacturing purposes, like for manufacturing of their goods. Some say vehicle for rental. The company gives its car on rental to Ola or Uber, right? Then administrative purposes, say a building, a office building, the company is using that office building for its corporate office. So these are the administrative purposes. If these assets are held for such uses, then we can say it is a PP. And these uses should be expected to last for more than one period. So there are these three principal criteria to qualify an item as a PP, which is tangible item. It should be held either for use in production or supply of goods or services, or for rental purposes, or for administrative purposes, and expected to be used during more than one period. Now, when I talked about rental, I gave an example for car or vehicle. I did not give an example for land or building. Why so? Because a land or a building that the company holds for rental purposes, for giving out on rent, is classified as investment property and not as PPE. So specifically, a property, which could be a land, a building, or both, is classified as investment property when it has been held for rental purposes or for capital appreciation, like pure investment property. So in short, we can say that if a land and building, we can say property, has been held for use in production or supply or for admin purposes, then it will be classified as PPE. In Ind AS 40, another term has been used called owner occupied property. That means a property that the owner occupies for its own purposes, like for production or for admin purposes, not for renting out to others or for capital appreciation. Another exclusion is when the company holds the property for sale in the ordinary course of business. In that case, the property is classified as inventory and neither as PPE nor as investment property. So this is the major classification, major difference between a PPE and investment property. So this should be clear that investment property can only be either a land or a building or both of them. Let's understand some examples of investment property. A land that has been held for long-term capital appreciation. Some companies invest in land, right? And for the objective for such investment is to earn capital appreciation, to earn the increase in the value of land. So that kind of land is also classified as investment property because that is for capital appreciation. Second part is land held for a currently undetermined future use. So there can be some cases when a company has invested in land and yet not decided whether to use it for its own purposes, like for production, whether the company wants to build a factory or manufacturing unit on that land, or wants to sell it in the ordinary course of business. So unless the company has decided the use of that land will be classified as investment property. It will be assumed that the land has been held for capital appreciation and hence will be classified as investment property. Another is building leased out under operating leases. So investment property can be owned by the company itself, or the company can hold that property under a lease as a ROU asset, right of use asset, which has been defined in India's 116 leases. But what if the company has further given that asset on lease? Now the difference will come when the company has given that asset either on finance lease or on operating lease. If the company has given that asset on operating lease, in that case, the asset remains in the balance sheet of the company. The asset is not de-recognized. Hence, it will be classified as investment property because the company has given that property on lease, on operating lease, that is for the purpose of earning rentals, and hence classifies the definition of investment property. On the other hand, if the company has given that building on finance lease, in that case, what happens is the company will have to de-recognize the property from its balance sheet. The asset does not remain in the balance sheet anymore, and hence there is no asset in the balance sheet at all. So the question of classification does not arise. Next is when the building could be vacant. Say, just like a land which was the future use of which was undetermined. Similarly, a building which is vacant, the company has not yet decided the purpose of that building, the use of that building. In that case also, the company will classify it as investment property if the company holds it for the purpose of giving out on operating leases. Next is the property that is being constructed or developed for future use as investment property. That means the company is constructing, is the property is under construction, and the future use is either for rental or for capital appreciation. Then in that case also the property will be classified as investment property. And as we discussed earlier, what is not an investment property? Number one, the owner occupied property, or we can say the property that can be classified as PPE, which is covered by Ind AS 16. Number two, the property held for sale in the ordinary course of business, because it will be classified as inventory and will be covered by Ind AS 2. Another is property that is leased to another entity under finance lease. As I just explained you that in case of finance lease, the property will be de-recognized from the balance sheet of the company and hence will not remain in the balance sheet. Now, there is a very thin line of difference between PPE and investment property when there is a single property, and it could be a case when a property comprises a portion of PPE and another portion of investment property. For example, a company has an office building and there are 2 floors on that, right? First floor, the company uses for its own purposes. The company has its own corporate office on the first floor, and the second floor, the company has given out on lease, right? In this case, the same building can be classified into PP. The first floor will be classified as PP and the second floor will be classified as investment property. This is the case when the separate recognition is possible, because an entire floor can be sold or can be leased out separately. But what if there is a single floor, right? And the company has primarily leased out the floor to someone else, but also certain employees of the company are sitting in the office, like certain seats or say 2 meeting rooms have been booked for the company's own employees. In that case, the classification, whether it's a PP or an investment property, could be difficult, right? Because one floor cannot be leased out separately or cannot be sold separately. In that case, the company will assess how much portion the company is using for its own, how much portion is owner occupied. If that portion is insignificant, say the company, the floor has a capacity of 50 employees and only 5 employees are sitting, which are the company's employees. In that case, we can say that the portion the company has occupied is insignificant and we can classify the entire floor as investment property. Next part is, there could be cases when ancillary services are provided to the occupants of the property. For example, a company has a mall, and the company provides security services for the mall, and also the maintenance services like lift and escalators and etc. In that case, these are the ancillary services, because the primary focus of the company is to lease out the mall to the retailers, right? And these security services and maintenance services are just ancillary services. In that case, we can say that these services are insignificant, and hence the property ultimately maintains its status as investment property, because the company is leasing out the mall to the retailers for earning rentals. So the mall will be classified as investment property. But on the other hand, suppose a company is owning a hotel and manages the hotel completely. Now, the services that a hotel manager provides to its guests are are uh, are very significant, right? The hotel manager provides a lot of various services like housekeeping, restaurant services, in some cases the tourism services, the cab services, etc. So in that case, the service portion is not insignificant. That is a significant portion. And hence, we will say that the property is just not an investment property, but it is a PPE. So if you say that when the company is managing a hotel, it is earning rentals, but you also need to see that the company is also providing a significant portion of other services. So hence it will be classified as property, plant and equipment, and will be covered under Ind AS 16 and not Ind AS 40. Now let's understand what these standards do not cover. So first of all, the assets that are held for sale, which is covered by Ind AS 105. Second is the biological assets, except the bearer plants. Now, what are bearer plants? Bearer plants are the agricultural activities. These are related to living plants, which are expected to produce for more than one period. And there are very insignificant chances that the asset will be sold, the plant will be sold, right? So for example, the rubber plant, right? This bearer plant is covered under Ind AS 16 only, but all other biological assets, all other agricultural produce are covered under Ind AS 40, like a wheat crop, fruit plants, any other agricultural farm, right? This is covered under Ind AS 41, but bearer plants are covered under Ind AS 16 and will be treated as PPE. Other than this, exploration and evaluation assets, which are covered under Ind AS 106, and mineral rights and mineral reserves. So these four items are out of the scope of Ind AS 16 and hence will not be guided by the standard. However, Ind AS 16 provides that it will be applicable to PPE which are used to develop or maintain the above assets. Now, for example, a company is engaged into agricultural activities, right? And it has a farm, and the company has grown wheat crops, and on the other hand, the company has grown rubber trees. So, wheat crop is a biological asset, is covered by Ind AS 41, but the rubber tree is a bearer plant, is covered by Ind AS 16. Now, the company has purchased certain irrigation equipments, say a sprinkler, to water the farm. Now, this asset, sprinkler, will be classified as PPE even though it is being used for watering the wheat crops, which will be covered by Ind AS 40. Why? Because this asset is used to develop and maintain the other assets, and hence the irrigation equipment, the sprinkler, will be guided by Ind AS 16. Now, there is one another very important aspect in Ind AS 16 about spare parts, standby equipments, and servicing equipments. So, the spare parts like loose tools, molds, and dies, these spare parts and standby equipments and servicing equipments will be classified as PPE if the recognition criteria is met. What is the recognition criteria? That it is a tangible asset, it is expected to be used for more than one period and held for use in production or for rental or for administrative purposes. So if this recognition criteria is met, in that case, the spare parts will be classified as PPE and will be covered under Ind AS 16. But otherwise, if these criteria is not fulfilled, then the same will be classified as inventory and will be guided by Ind AS 2. Now let's understand the recognition criteria. First criteria is that the future economic benefits will flow to the entity. It should be probable that the asset, the cost that has been incurred for a particular asset will bring certain future economic benefits. Now, what are these future economic benefits? Future economic benefits can be in terms of revenue, or it can be in terms of cost saving, or any other economic benefits for that matter. So if it is probable that the cost that has been incurred will in turn bring some future economic benefits, then we can say that recognition criteria is met provided other conditions are met. So the second condition is the cost can be measured reliably. So if the future economic benefits will flow to the entity, this is probable, and the cost will be can be measured reliably. In that case, we will recognize the cost as an asset. This recognition criteria is for PPE as well as investment property. So now we are clear what is a PPE. We are clear what is an investment property. We know how to distinguish between PPE and investment property. And we also understood about spare parts and standby equipments and servicing equipments. And also now we know that what is the recognition criteria, when a cost will be recognized as an asset. Now let's understand the initial measurement. What will be the cost? How much will be the value of that cost? How much will be the amount of that cost at which the asset will be recognized? So the asset is recognized at cost at the initial measurement, right? There are various components of that cost that we need to understand. Number one is purchase price. Now, purchase price is always considered net of trade discounts and rebates, but it includes the non-refundable taxes. For example, GST. If you are getting input tax credit for GST, in that case, the GST portion will not be included in the cost. But if the credit is blocked and and you will not get the ITC for that tax paid, in that case, the tax part will also be included in the cost of the asset. Second leg is directly attributable cost. What is a directly attributable cost? These are the costs that are directly attributable. Like these are incurred because of that asset. If the company had not acquired that asset, the cost would not have been incurred. Right. So this includes like salary cost, employee benefit cost for employees that are engaged in the construction or the development of that asset, or the site preparation cost, delivering and handling the cost, installation and assembling the cost, testing cost, professional fees. So these costs are necessary for bringing the asset into its current location and condition to make the use of that asset as was intended by the management. So one other very important leg of cost is initial estimate of costs of dismantling and removing the item and restoring. So let's understand this first. Say the company has received a land from government, and as per the agreement, the company has to give back this land like the land was received on lease, and the company is required to give this land back to the government as it is, right? And for the company plans to construct a factory building over that land. So after the certain period of time, say 50 years, the company is required to give that land back to the government as it is. That means the company will have to dismantle and remove the entire factory building from the land. So in that case, the cost of the factory building will include the cost of dismantling as well. Right. So there are certain obligations on the companies when they are required to dismantle or remove the item or restore the site. Right. And there is huge cost associated with these kind of activities. So the company is required to estimate these costs because these costs will be incurred in future. Hence, the company is required to estimate these costs, then discount these costs at initial recognition and include the cost part in the initial cost of that asset. And correspondingly, the company recognizes a provision which will be guided by Ind AS 37. Now, when does this capitalization of cost, including of cost into the value of asset stops? This capitalization ceases when the item is in the location and condition necessary for it to be capable of operating in the manner intended by the management. So this sentence is very important because this is the stopping point. When this happens, every cost that has been incurred will stop capitalizing. Right. So till this point, the cost that has been incurred in relation to that particular asset will be added to the cost of the asset, and after this point the cost will be expensed off provided the other conditions are met. So this was the story of initial cost, initial recognition. Now there could be certain cost that is subsequently incurred by the company in relation to that asset. For example, repair and maintenance cost. So these costs do not qualify to be capitalized. These costs are day-to-day servicing costs. These will be expensed off in P&L in the year in which they are incurred. Second most important type of subsequent cost is replacement cost or major inspection or overhaul. So these are the costs which, suppose in case of airline industry, the aircrafts require major inspection at a regular interval. For example, an aircraft is required to be overhauled after every 2 years, and the cost of that overhaul major inspection is say 2 lakhs. In that case, what happens is at the initial recognition of the cost of aircraft, the company will recognize that 2 lakhs as a separate component if that's a significant cost, and will de-recognize, will depreciate that 2 lakh rupees over the period of 2 years. And after 2 years, when the company will go for another inspection, the company will incur another cost. Hence, will de-recognize the previously recognized cost and will recognize the fresh inspection cost. And this story will keep on repeating until the de-recognition of the asset. Hence, this is same for replacement cost, inspection cost, and overall cost. The carrying amount of the item will recognize the cost of replacing the part, major inspection if the recognition criteria is satisfied, and the remaining carrying amount of the replaced part or the previous inspection will be de-recognized at the time of incurring another fresh cost. Now there are cases when the company gets a credit period for making payment with respect to PPE or investment property. In that case, what happens is the cost that the company is required to recognize will be equivalent to the cash price equivalent at the recognition date. So basically, this is the discounted price. This is the fair value as on the date of recognition. And what happens with the difference between this cash price and the total payment that the company is required to make? The company will recognize that portion as interest over the period of credit, unless the such interest is capitalized as per Ind AS 23. So Ind AS 23 talks about borrowing cost, and it provides guidance over the borrowing cost or the interest cost that needs to be capitalized in with respect to the qualifying assets. So if this cost falls under that category and is covered by Ind AS 23, in that case the cost will be capitalized. Otherwise, the interest cost will be expensed off in P&L over the period of credit. Now, this was about initial recognition and initial measurement. Now, what happens with the subsequent measurement? So, Ind AS 16, which talks about PP, and in Ind AS 40, which talks about investment property, has given different guidance for subsequent measurement. So, Ind AS 16 allows the companies to choose either cost model or revaluation model. And these models are applied as an accounting policy to a whole class of PP. Right? What is a class of PP? It is a grouping of assets having similar nature and similar use to the entity. Say land and building, plant and machinery, furniture and fixtures. Right? These assets, these classes of assets will comprise of individual assets which are of similar use to the entity. So when a company is applying a particular model on a class of PP, it will apply the same model to all the items covered in belonging to that particular class. On the other hand, in Ind AS 40, investment property gives only one option, that is cost model. It does not talk about revaluation model. However, Ind AS 40 makes it mandatory for the companies to disclose fair value of the properties. So only for the sake of disclosure, the fair value needs to be assessed and will be disclosed in notes, but the measurement will be done on cost model only. Now let's understand what is a cost model and revaluation model individually. So first of all, cost model. Cost model talks about subsequent measurement at cost, which was the initial recognized, the cost at initial measurement, less any accumulated depreciation. So the assets are depreciated over the period of their useful life. This depreciation is deducted from the cost, and impairment losses, accumulated impairment losses. Now, what is an impairment loss? Impairment loss arises when the carrying amount of an asset is higher than the recoverable amount of the asset. And this impairment loss is guided by Ind AS 36 impairment losses. Right. So the carrying amount under cost model is cost less accumulated depreciation less impairment losses. So this is a very simple accounting method. The cost model has been given as an option in Ind AS 16 for PP, and it has been made mandatory for investment properties under Ind AS 40. The next part is revaluation model. So Ind AS 16 has allowed companies to opt for a revaluation model as an accounting policy to subsequently measure their PP, but Ind AS 40 does not allow this model. Right. Now, what is revaluation model? So, in this model, the PP is carried at revalued amount. What is the revalued amount? Revalued amount is basically the fair value at the revaluation date. And so this revaluation, the fair valuation, can be done at any date, but if the same is done at any date other than the year end, 31st March, in that case, the company is required to recognize subsequent accumulated depreciation and subsequent accumulated impairment losses. Hence, the carrying amount in case of revaluation model will be the fair value as on the date of revaluation, less subsequent accumulated depreciation, less subsequent accumulated impairment losses. Now, this model also clarifies that if a single item of PP is revalued, then the entire class of PP to which it belongs will be revalued. For example, there is a class of PP which is furnitures and fixtures, and the company has opted for revaluation model for a particular furniture. In that case, the company is required to revalue all the items in that particular class at revaluation model only. The company cannot elect to go for cost model for other items of that PP. Right. For example, now another example for this is the company has two buildings. One building is used as a factory building and the other building is used as an office building. In that case, these two buildings are of different uses to the entities. Hence, these will comprise two classes of PP. One will be factory building and another will be office building. In that case, the company can apply revaluation model to one building and cost model to the another. But if both the buildings were used for, say, factory purposes or for office purposes, both the buildings were used for single purpose, same purpose. In that case, both the buildings would have been comprised in one single class as building, and both the buildings would have been revalued, or both the buildings would have been taken at cost. There would not have been any option to apply different models on any of the buildings. So the class of assets are of different. There are different classes like land and building, then machinery, ships, aircraft, motor vehicles, furniture and fixtures, office equipment, and bearer plants. So these are just examples, and there can be some other classes as well. So it depends upon how the company uses that asset and what is the nature of that asset for that particular company. Now, when the asset is taken at revaluation model, there will be some revaluation gains or losses because the company is required to remeasure the value of that asset, which can be different from carrying amount of that asset. So in that case, what happens and how the gains and losses are recognized? So in this case, when there is a first time revaluation and there is an increase in the value of asset, the same will be recognized as revaluation reserve or revaluation surplus as a component of OCI. And subsequently, if the value at the time of revaluation further increases, the gain will be recorded again in revaluation reserve. But if it decreases, then the same will be adjusted from the revaluation reserve first, and then the access will be recognized in profit and loss account. Similarly, on the other hand, when there is a first time revaluation and there is a decrease in the value of asset as against the carrying amount, then the loss will be recognized in profit and loss account. And subsequently, if the value increases at the time of revaluation, then the same will be first adjusted from the P&L to the extent the earlier loss recognized, and then the remaining will be recognized in revaluation reserve. But if there is subsequent decrease again, then the same will be recognized in P&L. So all in all, we just need to see that the increase is recognized in revaluation reserve as a component of OCI and decrease is recognized in P&L. But at the time of subsequent measurements, if there is an opposite movement in the value, in that case, the earlier recognition will be adjusted first and then the remaining portion will be adjusted as per the guidance given in this standard, that is revaluation reserve for increase and P&L for decrease. Now this revaluation reserve remains in OCI, but There are cases when this needs to be transferred to retained earnings, and the transfer does not flow through profit and loss. So, what are these cases? Number one, when the asset is de-recognized. So, at the time when the asset is de-recognized, the entire amount recognized in revaluation surplus will be reclassified to retained earnings. And also, when the asset is used, the difference between the depreciation based on revalued carrying amount and or asset's original cost. So try to understand this. When the asset is revalued, the value is different from the carrying amount. Hence, the depreciation amount will also differ, because had the asset been carried at its original cost, the depreciation amount would have been different. But now, since the asset has been revalued, the cost, the carrying amount of the asset has been changed. Accordingly, the depreciation amount will also change. It could increase, it could decrease. Right. In that case, when there is a difference between these depreciation as per the revalued carrying amount and the asset's original cost, the difference will be the difference can be transferred from the revaluation surplus to retained earnings directly. So these are two cases when revaluation surplus is transferred to retained earnings and the transfer does not flow through profit and loss account. Now let's understand about depreciation. What is depreciation? So depreciation is basically what? Depreciable amount of an asset is computed. What is depreciable amount? Depreciable amount is the cost of the asset at the time of initial measurement less the residual value. Residual value is the value that the company expects to realize at the time of derecognition or the sale of the asset further. So this amount is allocated on a systematic basis over the useful life of the asset. Now, these terms are different in this standard. What is useful life? Useful life is not same as economic life of the asset. It can be different. So it can be lower than the economic life. How? Say, for example, a plant and machinery has an economic life of 20 years. Right. But when the asset was acquired by the company, the machine was already 6 years old. In that case, the remaining life of the machine over which the company can use that machine is only 14 years. So 14 years is the useful life of that asset for the company, and 20 years was the economic life of that asset. Right? So the company will depreciate the the depreciable amount over the 14 years of useful life. So useful life needs to be assessed by the company. It is an estimate. Residual value is also an estimate made by the company, and various certain facts and circumstances need to be considered by the company while assessing the residual value and useful life. Now, once the company has determined the depreciable amount and the useful life, the company can simply calculate the depreciation to be recognized, right? And this depreciation is charged to P&L as an expense unless these are included in the carrying amount of another asset. Now, what would be the case when the depreciation charge is included in the carrying amount of another asset? Say, for example, inventories. Valuation of inventory as per Ind AS 2. The cost of conversion will include the depreciation charges of the machinery on which the inventory was produced. Right. So in that case, the depreciation charge will be included in the carrying amount of inventory and will not be expensed off directly in the P&L. So this was one case. Moving on, with respect to depreciation, Ind AS 16 has clearly specified that the depreciation will be charged on a component approach. That componentization will be done, and major parts of the item of PP, with cost being significant in relation to the total cost of the item, will be depreciated separately. Right. So the company needs to recognize these major parts separately at initial recognition only, so that the company can calculate and recognize depreciation on these parts separately over the period of useful life. Now, if the different significant parts have same useful life, so when will the depreciation differ? When the useful life is different, right? But if two different significant parts have same useful life and same depreciation method also, in that case, the company may group these two parts and determine the depreciation charge together. So, in short, the company is required to recognize the major part of the item of PPE separately, and will see if the useful life is different and the depreciation method is different from the other asset. Then, in that case, the depreciation will be charged separately. Otherwise, two different parts can be clubbed together, form a group, and then depreciation charge can be determined for both the assets together. So, this is the component approach in which the different components are recognized, provided they are significant. Now let's understand about the depreciation methods. So Ind AS 16 clearly states that the depreciation will be recognized on a systematic basis, right, which truly reflects the consumption of asset and benefits of the asset to the company. And also this standard specifies three different methods of depreciation, which is straight line method, straight line basis, in which case the constant depreciation charges recognized in P&L. The charge remains constant. What happens is the total depreciable amount is divided by the useful life, and the same equal amount is charged to P&L at every year end. And WDV method, which is written down value method. In that case, what happens is the depreciation charge diminishes over the useful life of useful life of the asset. Why? Because the a rate is calculated in this case, a depreciation rate is calculated in this case, and the rate is applied at the net carrying amount of that asset. The net carrying amount of an asset keeps on diminishing over the period of life because of depreciation charge, and at the end it and at the end it becomes equal to the residual value of that asset, right? Another method is units of production method. In this case, what happens is the depreciation is charged on the basis of expected output. That means how much units the particular asset is expected to produce over the life of over its useful life. In that case, the depreciation charge in proportion to the number of units that have been produced by the asset in a particular year. So the depreciation method, once decided, will be reviewed at every year end. And this change in method, in case the method changes, the change in method will be accounted for as a change in accounting estimate, and will be accounted for as per the guidance given in Ind AS 8. Now, there are three components. Number one is residual value, the useful life, and depreciation method. Right? These three components are reviewed at every year end, and all of these will be reviewed, and when there is a change in any of these, will be accounted for as accounting estimate, and will be accounted for in accordance with Ind AS 8. Now, when does the depreciation begins? What is the point? What is the starting point of charging depreciation? So, depreciation of an asset begins when it is available for use. And when is it available for use? It is available for use when the asset has been brought in the location and condition necessary for it to be capable of operating in the manner intended by management. This sentence in this particular standard is very, very important because this is a starting point for charging depreciation and ending point for capitalizing the cost. So this point needs to be assessed, and a company needs to determine which is the date on which the asset is being available for use, and will stop capitalizing the cost and will start charging depreciation. And what is the stop point for charging depreciation? The depreciation is charged till the residual value is greater than or equal to the carrying amount, right? Because if the residual value, if the carrying amount exceeds residual value, that means some portion is still needs to be depreciated. But if the residual value is greater than the carrying amount, in that case, nothing can be depreciated further, and the asset will be carried at its residual value. That is the minimum amount that the asset needs to be carried at until its derecognition. The depreciation ultimately ceases when the asset is derecognized or it is held for sale under Ind AS 105. Right. So it starts when it is available for use. It is charged till residual value is greater than or equal to the carrying amount, and it stops. It stops either when the residual value is greater than or equal to the carrying amount, or when the asset is derecognized or held for sale, whichever is earlier. Now there's a lot of contemplation that goes when the asset is idle or is retired from active use, and the and whether the company should charge depreciation during that period as well or not. So the standard clearly states that the depreciation does not stop automatically when the asset is idle or is retired from active use, right? So depreciation is never zero uh, due to the asset's condition, asset's use, until unless the depreciation method the company has adopted is unit of production method, because this is the only method in which the depreciation can go zero, because it is directly related to the number of units that have been produced by the asset. And in case the asset is idle, the units produced will be zero, and automatically the depreciation charge is zero. So in this COVID lockdown period, a lot of companies have stopped their operations, right? A lot of assets were not used and no production was there. The companies did not really produce any unit. So in this case, in during this COVID-19 period, the companies were contemplating whether the depreciation should be charged or not, because the assets were not used. So it was clarified that if the company has adopted SLM basis or WDV basis, the company is still required to charge depreciation, even though there is no use, the asset has not been used during the lockdown period. But if the company has adopted unit of production method, then automatically the depreciation will be zero if there is no production. Right. So there was this clarification regarding this particular point. I'll just check the YouTube once. If there is any query, then. Okay. Perfect. So now, as we discussed earlier also, that useful life and residual value are estimates that are made by the management, right, considering various factors, facts and circumstances. These estimates are reviewed by the management at every year end, and if there is any change in the useful life or the residual value, the same is treated as changes in estimates, and the accounting is done prospectively as per Ind AS 8. And when there is a change in useful life or residual value, the depreciable amount automatically changes, and the future annual depreciation will be revised based on the new useful life or the new residual value. Now, there's a small concept on land and building which needs clarification here. So, Ind AS 16 clarifies that when the company has a land and building uh, together, it needs to be accounted for separately, even when it is acquired together. Right. Why this guidance was needed? Because the land has unlimited useful life. Right. Land does not have a limited useful life until unless there is a contractual obligation or there is a particular agreement that guides the useful life of that land for that particular entity. Right. So if the land has unlimited useful life, it will not be depreciated. But on the other hand, buildings have limited useful life, and hence the depreciation is required to be charged on building. Then how the depreciation will be charged when there is a single value of land and building? So the standard states that the accounting needs to be done separately. Land will be separated from building, and depreciation will be charged on building, and land will not be depreciated over the period of time. But if there is a component in the cost of land which pertains to dismantlement or removal or restoration of land, as we discussed earlier, in that case, that component of cost will be depreciated over the period of benefits of that cost. Right, as we discussed earlier, uh, in which case the government gave a land on lease to the company, and the company, as per the agreement, was required to give back that land to the government as it is, and company eventually constructed a factory building over that land. Right, so at the end of the day, the company is required to dismantle the factory building and bring the land in the earlier condition to give back to the government. In that case, if there is certain restoration to be done on the land, that cost will be included in the cost of land, and hence that particular cost will be depreciated over the period of the benefit of that cost, because the another part of the cost of land will not be depreciated. Now, as per Ind AS 40, there can be cases when the company changes the use of a particular property, and once a property which was classified as investment property is now an owner occupied property or a PP, or it could be classified as inventory because the use has been changed, right? So in that case, what happens is the cost does not change. The cost is the asset will still be carried at carrying value, but however, the classification will change. So for example, the owner occupied property, which was recognized as per Ind AS 16, is now has now become investment property, so it will be classified as investment property in the balance sheet. And similarly, if it was inventory earlier and now has become investment property, or it was investment property earlier and now has become owner occupied, or it was earlier investment property and now has become inventory. So only the classification is changed in the books, and the deemed cost still remains the carrying value. The cost is not changed at all. Now, the last part of this presentation, when the asset is retired or the asset is disposed of or it is de-recognized, right? So, when the asset needs to be de-recognized, the carrying amount of an item of PP or investment property shall be de-recognized on disposal. Now, disposal can be done by sale of that asset or by entering into a finance lease. As we discussed at the start of this lecture, that in case the asset is given on finance lease further, that the asset needs to be de-recognized. Hence, the question of classifying it as investment property or PP or inventory does not arise at all. Therefore, on disposal, either by sale or by entering into into a finance lease, the asset is de-recognized. And also, when no future economic benefits are expected from its use or disposal, in that case also the asset is de-recognized. Now, what happens with the difference between the carrying amount and the net disposal proceeds. So the amount of gain or loss on derecognition will be recognized in P&L, but this gain or loss will not be classified as revenue, but it will be classified as other income and will be stated as gain or loss on derecognition of PP or investment property. So this was about PP and investment property. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to take. Otherwise, you can always reach out to me on my personal email ID and my phone number.
Chandni ji, you have covered very well, and I think entire things under PP and investment property has been covered. And I think जो डाउट्स होंगे जिसके ऑलरेडी क्लियर हो गए हैं, फिर भी कोई अगर किसी का डाउट है तो यू हैव शेयर्ड योर मेल आईडी, आप तक पहुंच सकते हैं.
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल.
So with this, anything else, Chandni, you want to conclude before end?
So that's all I want to conclude, that these two standards are very important because these are commonly used standards. These are asset-based standards, and almost every company has some tangible assets, even if it does not have any intangible asset, but it will always have some tangible assets. So the applicability of these standards is wide, and hence everyone needs to understand these standards. And also because AS10, the companies that are applying IGAAP, AS10 is on the similar lines with Ind AS 16. So even if you have seen this webinar on Ind AS 16, you have already covered AS10 also. So yes, I think coverage of these two standards is really important, and I'm thankful to Sumit sir for allowing me to discuss on these topics today. And I request all the viewers to go through this, and if you have any queries, you can always reach out to me.
डेफिनेटली थैंक यू. चांदनी, तुमने सही चीज बताई कि कहीं ना कहीं दिस स्टैंडर्ड आर एप्लीकेबल ऑन ऑलमोस्ट all the companies. They are having property, plant and equipment and investment. And mostly company are having these assets in their balance sheet. And if आपने अभी एक रिवोल्यूशन की बात जो करी थी, आरओ की रिपोर्टिंग में भी हम चेक करेंगे तो रिवोल्यूशन अगर कोई प्रॉपर्टी का कोई एसेट्स का रिवोल्यूशन करते हैं तो उसकी रिपोर्टिंग भी आरओ 2020 के अकॉर्डिंग हमें करनी है. तो दिस इज ऑल्सो रिक्वायर्ड एंड नीड टू अंडरस्टैंड द रिवोल्यूशन ऑफ पीपी एंड अदर एक्सपेक्ट, सो डैट हम इसकी रिपोर्टिंग भी आरओ के पॉइंट से भी हम अपना सही कर पाए, क्योंकि दिस इज एप्लीकेबल फॉर द करंट फाइनेंशियल ईयर. And I think very well presented session. So Priyanka ji, I request to conclude the session.
Thank you, Chandni ji, for today's session. This was very informative, and I hope our viewers must have learned a lot from this session. And thank you so much, sir, for this for organizing this session. So viewers, we will keep organizing such kind of sessions. So अगर आपको कोई भी नॉलेज शेयरिंग या फिर आपको कोई भी किसी भी टॉपिक पे वेबिनार चाहिए तो यू कैन रिक्वेस्ट सुमित सर, ही विल ऑर्गेनाइज दिस वेबिनार. And with this, I'll say thank you to everyone to watch this webinar. With this, I'm concluding this session. Thank you so much.